She looked around the courtroom, gave a small smile, and blew a kiss as she walked into Vista Superior Court in Vista, California. For a moment, her expression seemed almost out of place, as if she were entering something casual instead of waiting for a jury to decide whether she could spend decades behind bars. Jade Janks may have believed that the story about the private images would make people see her as the victim. Her defense team argued that finding intimate photos of herself on her former stepfather's computer would naturally cause anger, shock, and a desire to cut ties with him. But they also argued that emotional outrage alone was not enough to prove that someone would intentionally cause another person's death. Her attorney claimed that Thomas Merriman either took too much medication by accident or may have been responsible for his own condition. At first, the defense theory seemed possible enough for the jury to consider. It gave them a reason to pause. It offered an explanation built around betrayal, fear, and a sudden emotional break. But then the messages from Jade's phone entered the case, and the entire story began to shift. What you are about to see is the moment Jade Janks realized that her version of events could not stand against the evidence. Her former stepfather, Thomas Merriman, was later found outside his home, concealed beneath debris near the driveway area. What began as a private family crisis became a criminal case shaped by phone data, witness statements, and Jade's unusual behavior after Thomas's death. This case began with what looked like a simple act of assistance. Jade picked up her former stepfather from a medical facility and was supposed to help him get home. But by the end, that routine errand had turned into a tragedy that would bring investigators, prosecutors, and a jury into the center of a deeply disturbing family story. Every major detail in this case has been examined through court records, law enforcement findings, prosecution evidence, and the final judgment handed down in court. This is not a rumor, and it is not a story built only on emotion. It is a real criminal case that unfolded in Solana Beach in San Diego County, California, on the 31st of December 2020. If you have never heard this case before, what happened that day will challenge the way you think about betrayal inside a family, the limits of anger, and how far one person may go when a private secret becomes impossible to contain. It also shows how phone data can expose a carefully shaped explanation, even when someone believes the truth can still be controlled. To understand why Jade Janks ended up inside that courtroom, we first have to understand the relationship behind the case, the discovery she said changed everything, and the hidden motive prosecutors believed led to Thomas Merriman's death. Before we go deeper into the timeline, we need to look at the people at the center of this case. Before the text messages, before the police searches, and before a jury was asked to decide what happened on New Year's Eve, there was a long family relationship. Thomas Merriman was 64 years old and lived in the coastal community of Solana Beach, California. He was known publicly as a co-founder of Butterfly Farms in nearby Encinitas, a nonprofit connected to butterfly education and conservation. In that world, he was not introduced as a criminal suspect or a headline. He was a local figure, someone tied to a small conservation community and to a family history that stretched back years. Jade Janks lived close by and worked as an interior designer. Her connection to Thomas was personal, not casual. He had once been married to her mother, and according to trial coverage, he entered Jade's life when she was still a teenager. Even after that marriage ended, the relationship did not disappear. Thomas still referred to Jade as his daughter, and Jade referred to him as her father. That history matters because it shaped the way she later described the discovery in his home. This was not a dispute between strangers. It was not a sudden argument between two people with no shared past. Jade had known Thomas through adolescence, adulthood, family gatherings, and the ordinary closeness that can remain after a household changes shape. She had enough trust in him to help when he was recovering from a fall and preparing to come home from care. That is why the computer discovery became so central to the case. For the defense, it explained the emotional break in Jade's view of Thomas. For the prosecution, it explained motive, not innocence. The same family history that made the discovery painful also made the events that followed harder to separate from intent. The quiet strength of this case was that neither side presented Jade Janks as a person who was easy to define. To the defense, she was a daughter figure who had discovered something deeply invasive in the home of a man she once trusted. She was employed, settled, and connected to Thomas Merriman through years of family history. That image gave her story emotional weight. It made her reaction seem human before the evidence made it legally complicated. The prosecution asked the jury to look at another version of the same woman. In their view, Jade was not only wounded by what she found, she was capable of turning that discovery into action. They pointed to her phone, her messages, the people she contacted, and the items she purchased after Thomas left medical care. Those details suggested planning, not confusion. Thomas also carried more than one image in the courtroom. Publicly, he was known as a co-founder of Butterfly Farms, a local nonprofit connected to education and conservation in Encinitas. Privately, the case revealed allegations that changed how the jury understood his relationship with Jade. That did not put Thomas on trial, but it did make the story harder to hear in a simple way. This duality shaped everything that followed. Jade could be seen as someone who had been betrayed, while also being judged for what prosecutors said she did next. Thomas could be seen as a victim, while the discovery on his computer remained part of the context. The trial required the jury to hold both realities at once. That tension did not answer the case by itself. It only prepared the ground for the next question. When Jade moved from discovery to action inside that quiet house, did the evidence show panic, or did it show intent? The escalation in this case did not begin on New Year's Eve. It began years earlier, with a relationship that had become familiar enough to feel stable. Thomas Merriman came into Jade Janks' life when she was still a teenager, after he married her mother. Even after that marriage ended, the relationship between Jade and Thomas did not completely fall away. He remained part of the family history, and over time, the connection settled into something less formal but still close. He was no longer her stepfather in a day-to-day household sense, but he was still someone she knew well, someone she could visit, and someone she would later help when his health declined. By 2020, Jade was living in Solana Beach, California, and Thomas was nearby. That proximity mattered. It meant their lives were not separated by distance or silence. When he needed assistance, Jade was close enough to step in. She had access to his home. She knew the space. She was not entering as a stranger or an outsider. She was entering as someone with years of shared history. In April of that year, their lives became even more closely connected when they were living near each other in the same coastal community. The arrangement made ordinary contact easier. It also meant that, when Thomas later suffered a serious fall, Jade was in a position to help with practical things around his house. That fall happened in December of 2020. Thomas was admitted to medical care after being injured at home, and while he was away, Jade went to clean and prepare the house for his return. In another family, that might have remained a small act of support. In this case, it became the moment that changed the direction of everything that followed. On December 23, according to reporting on the case, Jade said she was in Thomas's home when his computer screen came on. What she saw, she later testified, were private images of herself. She described finding many of them, including images stored in folders that made the discovery feel even more deliberate. Whether the jury believed every part of her emotional account or not, the fact of the discovery became central to both sides. For the defense, this was the moment Jade's trust collapsed. They presented it as a deeply personal violation, the kind of discovery that could overwhelm someone who had once viewed Thomas as a father figure. For prosecutors, the same discovery served a different purpose. It gave them what they believed was motive. It explained why the relationship shifted so quickly from family contact to criminal investigation. After the discovery, Jade was introduced through Facebook to Alan Roach. Prosecutors would later describe him as a kind of fixer, someone Jade believed could help with serious problems. That connection became important because the messages between Jade and Roach later gave investigators a window into what she was thinking and doing. As the situation moved toward December 31, by New Year's Eve, Thomas was being released from care. Jade went to pick him up. On its face, that act still looked like assistance from someone close to him. But by then, the discovery on the computer had already happened. The relationship had changed in Jade's mind, and the messages that would later become evidence were beginning to form a clearer picture. This was the point where the case left the background and entered the timeline prosecutors would build in court. Thomas Merriman was coming home. Jade Janks was the person bringing him there. And by the end of that night, the private fracture between them would become a public criminal case. The 31st of December 2020 began as a day that had an ordinary explanation. Thomas Merriman had been recovering after a fall, and Jade Janks went to pick him up from the medical facility where he received care. On the surface, it looked like a former stepdaughter helping an older man return home on New Year's Eve. But by the time that day was reconstructed in court, prosecutors argued that the ride home was not the beginning of care. It was the beginning of the final sequence. After Jade picked up Thomas, she did not immediately settle into a quiet return home. Trial reporting later described stops at a shopping plaza near where they lived. She went into a CVS, a liquor store, and a hardware store. Among the items discussed in court were gloves, towels, and nylon cord. The defense tried to keep those purchases in an ordinary frame, pointing to Jade's work and the fact that such items can have innocent uses. Prosecutors asked the jury to hear them in context, not as random objects, as purchases made while Thomas was in her care. That is why the phone evidence became important later. It filled in parts of the day that no single witness could describe. In messages to Alan Roach, Jade wrote that she had dosed the hell out of him. Prosecutors used that phrase forcefully because it placed medication inside the timeline before any later explanation could soften what was happening. The message did not sound like someone discovering a medical emergency after the fact. It sounded like someone describing an action already taken. As the day continued, the messages became more troubling. Jade indicated that Thomas was waking up and that she needed help. Another message, later reported in trial coverage, suggested she was prepared to strike him if he regained awareness. The defense could still argue that these were chaotic words from a woman in emotional distress, but the prosecution treated them as real-time evidence. The point was not only what Jade said, it was when she said it. The messages placed fear, planning, and urgency inside the hours when Thomas was supposed to be coming home safely. Alan Roach did not come to help her. That absence left Jade still trying to manage the situation herself. Later, Adam Sipliak became important after he contacted authorities and reported that Jade had told him she may have been responsible for Thomas's death and needed help moving his body. His account helped move the case from a private crisis into a formal law enforcement response. By then, according to prosecutors, Jade's problem was no longer only Thomas's condition, it was what to do next. They argued that she wanted his death to appear connected to medication, but that the plan did not unfold cleanly. Thomas was not found in a bed as though he had simply passed during the night. He was found outside, in the driveway area, concealed under debris. That detail became one of the most difficult parts of the case for the defense. Panic can explain confusion. It can explain a delayed call, a bad decision, or a person reaching out to the wrong people. But prosecutors asked the jury to look at the day as a sequence. Jade picked Thomas up. She made purchases. She sent messages about medication. She tried to bring others into the situation. By the end, Thomas Merriman was not safely inside his home. He was hidden outside it. After Thomas Merriman was no longer seen alive, Jade Janks' conduct became central to the prosecution's theory. The state did not ask jurors to judge only the medical evidence. It asked them to consider what Jade did when, according to investigators, a normal response would have been to call for help. That call did not come from Jade. One of the people Jade contacted was Adam Sipliak, a male friend who was not part of the family dispute. On New Year's Day, Sipliak called the San Diego County Sheriff's Department and reported that Jade might have possibly killed her stepdad. He told dispatchers that Jade had said she needed help moving Thomas, although he had not seen Thomas himself and could not confirm what had happened. That call brought deputies into a situation Jade had not reported on her own. When investigators began looking for Thomas, they did not find him inside Jade's home or Thomas's home. They spoke with people connected to the case, checked the property, and tried to understand why a man recently released from care could not be located. That afternoon, deputies saw Jade leaving the driveway and stopped her. She agreed to speak with them, but Thomas's location was still unclear. For prosecutors, the issue was not confusion alone, it was the pattern around it. Jade had reached out to people outside official channels. She was accused of wanting Thomas placed in bed so his passing might appear connected to medication. When investigators searched, the scene did not give them a simple explanation. By the next morning, Thomas was found in the driveway, covered beneath trash, tools, and cardboard. That discovery changed the meaning of every delay before it. One message to Alan Roach became difficult for the defense to explain. "Lose my number. I'm getting pulled over." Prosecutors treated that line as a sign of awareness, a moment when Jade understood that the people she contacted could connect her to what happened. Her behavior afterward did not prove the entire case by itself, but it gave investigators a starting point and led naturally into the evidence that came next. After Thomas Merriman was found outside his Solana Beach home on the 2nd of January 2021, the investigation became less about searching and more about testing Jade Janks' account against the physical record. The first fact investigators had to deal with was where Thomas was found. He was not inside the house, and he was not in a place that suggested someone had called for help and waited for responders. He was in the driveway area, wrapped in a blanket and covered with items including trash, tools, and cardboard boxes. For detectives, that did not answer the cause of death, but it did show concealment. Someone had taken steps to keep him out of view. The second focus was Jade's phone. According to CBS reporting, investigators treated the phone as one of the most important sources in the case because it contained messages sent during the critical window around Thomas's return from care. Those messages did not arrive as courtroom explanations after the fact. They were written close to the time when Thomas was with Jade, and they gave prosecutors a timeline that could be compared with store receipts, witness statements, and the later discovery of the body. The messages with Alan Roach became damaging. Prosecutors said Jade wrote that she had dosed the hell out of him, then sent messages suggesting Thomas was waking up and that she needed help. Other messages discussed a dark joke about Weekend at Bernie's, and when police attention was closing in, Jade told Roach, "Lose my number." The prosecution argued that the sequence showed planning and awareness. The defense argued that the words had to be understood through panic, shock, and fear after a disturbing discovery inside Thomas's home. Investigators also examined the medication evidence. Zolpidem, commonly known as Ambien, was central because Thomas had a significant amount in his system. CBS reported that prosecutors pointed to DNA evidence on Zolpidem packaging, arguing that Jade's DNA was found there and that Thomas's was not. For the state, that supported the theory that the medication was not simply something Thomas managed on his own. For the defense, the broader medical picture still left room for doubt, because Thomas had recently been in care and had access to prescription medication. The store purchases added another layer. After picking Thomas up, Jade was linked to items such as rope, towels, gloves, and zip ties. The defense could describe those items as ordinary supplies connected to work, home projects, or painting. Prosecutors saw them differently. In their view, the timing made the objects harder to separate from the messages and from the condition in which Thomas was found. Then there was Adam Sipliak. His call to the San Diego County Sheriff's Department on New Year's Day brought authorities into the case. He reported that Jade may have killed her stepfather and had asked for help moving the body. That call mattered, because the first urgent report did not come from Jade. It came from someone outside the family who became alarmed by what he had heard. By the end of the investigation, the evidence did not depend on one single item. The driveway showed concealment. The phone showed Jade's words in real time. The medication raised questions about how Thomas became impaired. The store records showed what Jade obtained during the same window. Sipliak's call showed how the case reached law enforcement. Together, those pieces gave prosecutors a clear argument. Jade's story could be emotional, but the evidence had its own order. And that order would become the foundation of the courtroom battle that followed. At trial, the conflict was not about whether Jade Janks had found something disturbing on Thomas Merriman's computer. Both sides understood that discovery shaped the case. The fight was over what it explained. The defense asked jurors to begin with shock. Jade, they said, had trusted Tom as a father figure, then found private images that left her feeling violated. Her lawyers argued that Tom was fragile, had just come from care, and had access to medication. The high level of Zolpidem in his system, they said, left room for doubt about how he died. Jade's later conduct was presented as panic, poor judgment, fear of blame, and confused messages sent during a crisis. They also challenged witnesses such as Adam Sipliak and Brian Solomon, arguing that their accounts should not be treated as clean proof of intent. The prosecution gave the same facts a different meaning. To the state, the images were motive, not an excuse. Prosecutors argued that Jade became angry after the discovery, reached out to Alan Roach for help, picked Tom up from care, and then tried to manage the situation as his condition changed. The messages were central because they appeared to describe what was happening in real time, including medication, fear that Tom was waking up, and the need for help. The store purchases and concealed body supported the argument that this was not a frightened reaction after an unexpected death. In closing, prosecutors tried to keep the jury focused on Jade's choices. They knew the evidence about Tom could make jurors uncomfortable, but their point was simple. Tom's private conduct was not the charge before the court. Jade's actions were. That was the battle the jury had to decide: panic after tragedy or planning followed by concealment. The defense did not break under one dramatic reveal. It weakened when prosecutors asked the jury to read Jade Janks' messages as a timeline, not as scattered words from a frightened woman. The sequence began with the line, "I just dosed the hell out of him," then moved through messages suggesting Thomas Merriman was waking up, that help was needed, and that Jade was still trying to control what came next. Later, prosecutors pointed to the reference to Weekend at Bernie's and the final warning to Alan Roach to lose her number, because police were stopping her. In closing, the state argued that the story began with dosing and ended with distancing herself from a witness. Between those points, they said, was not simple panic after an unexpected death, but a deliberate effort to manage Thomas as a problem before the truth reached police, inside the most critical hours of trial. On the 21st of December, 2022, a Vista jury found Jade Sasha Janks guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Thomas Merriman. The verdict came after jurors heard the story of a family relationship, a disturbing discovery, and the evidence investigators said followed it inside a California courtroom. For Jade, the courtroom did not end with the verdict. At sentencing on the 6th of March 2023, she continued to deny killing Tom. She spoke about the private images she said she found, the emotional harm she described, and the sense that the relationship had been broken in a way she could not repair. CBS later noted that 48 hours could not independently verify some of the claims Jade raised at sentencing. What was clear was that she admitted concealing Tom's body, while still insisting she had not caused his death. The judge sentenced her to 25 years to life in prison. The case did not close there. CBS reported in 2024 that Jade was appealing her conviction. Later that year, local reporting said a California appellate panel upheld the first-degree murder conviction, leaving the jury's decision in place and making the aftermath another chapter in a case built on betrayal, evidence, and accountability. The Jade Janks case remains disturbing because it never fits into one simple emotional category. It involved a former family relationship, a private discovery that changed how Jade said she saw Thomas Merriman, and a criminal investigation that moved beyond shock into evidence, timing, and accountability. The case was not only about what Jade claimed to feel, it was about what prosecutors said she did after that discovery, and whether her explanation could survive the record presented in court. The largest message from this case is that pain does not erase responsibility. A person may feel betrayed, violated, or emotionally broken, but the law still looks at actions, choices, and consequences. The courtroom could acknowledge the disturbing nature of what Jade said she found, while still asking whether Thomas Merriman's death was intentionally caused and concealed. The lesson is not to ignore emotional trauma, but to understand that crisis does not justify taking control of another person's fate. When something deeply harmful is discovered, the safest path is to seek lawful help, document the truth, and bring the situation into the open. Once fear turns into secrecy, silence, or concealment, the truth becomes harder to protect, and the consequences can become irreversible.